All right. Good evening, good morning, wherever it is you might be joining us from. Good, whatever time might be, wherever you are. Welcome to Tertuliando en Cuarentena. Good day to all. Gathering in quarantine in good English. Today, Friday, we have an exciting guest. We always have exciting guests. I mean, we have high standard, and and a high standard is basically people who want to share authentic stories and who want to partake of this intentional, accidental, intentional space where we intersect and we uh, basically experience dialogue at the best of our human abilities, especially in times like these when I feel that that's not happening as often as it should. So, without any further ado, joining us from Australia, from down under, on that side of the world. I'm on this side of the world. This is the magic that happens here, and I love it. So let's bring my good friend Anthony Venn-Brown. A ver. Welcome.
Hello there.
Gracias
Good
for
to see
joining.
you,
Yeah, good to
Angel.
see you too, Anthony. It's a privilege, a pleasure, and I've been looking forward to this day for quite a while. And I've for those of you who don't know about Anthony, well, you'll get to know a little bit by the end of this interaction and this exchange. But I've known a little bit, at least a little hinting bit about you, almost 15 years ago. Comes now. I say that I feel a bit older.
Wow.
I say that. Do you feel a bit older about that, or just I feel older and rejuvenated at the same time?
I feel
15.
perfect.
And and in and
Yes.
and in that spirit, I mean, 15 years is a lot of different events that happen in life. I mean, I can tell you like my mindset and my mind frame where I was at 15 years ago, and I think the willingness to give oneself the willingness to learn and unlearn can definitely take you through very exciting ventures and also very hard process in life to let go of some things that we might consider as the ground that we stand on. So it's good sometimes to let go of those things. But I like to start things off in this space, Anthony, talking about the current context that we find ourselves in, the current context of pandemia. And if you could share a little bit of still, what things were you venturing on before March, which is kind of when this whole thing breaks out,
Uh,
at least in the U.S. I don't know, maybe in Australia, but around that time, February, March, what things were you doing, and how that impacts you, and how has it been for you in these during these last 6 months? And it's a three-part question. So, what were you doing beforehand? Yeah, I used my questions very well. What were you doing beforehand? How has it impacted you? The ride of 6 months, how has it been? And maybe also your observations. Like what things have you noticed in terms of society, and what this has probably brought to the surface, whereas pre-pandemia was a little bit harder to see. Now this during pandemic times, it has made some things quite clear in terms of society locally and at large.
well, you can hear me?
Let's see, give it a go now.
Okay, can you hear me okay?
Now I can.
Oh, okay, that's good. That helps. Otherwise, people have to lip read. So, to answer your three-part question regarding the pandemic, that I am incredibly blessed and in this current situation, in that I was living in Sydney, and when the lockdown happened in Sydney, a friend said to me, "Oh, look, I've got this little cottage um, down in the national park." Uh, As I do, Angel, essentially is on the internet anyway. So my life actually has really unusual, I guess. I having real challenges with the pandemic. And, and
Okay, we're having some techie trouble. Let's see if I can uh see if it'll sort out a little bit. The a lot of what you're saying, which I don't want to miss out on, as cut out a little bit. Let me try and refresh here. Give me one moment. Okay. Okay, let's see if we can have Anthony come back in as soon as he, let's see. Okay, let's see. Let's see. You can retake where you left off. Can you hear me, Anthony?
right, it's saying here that I can hear you okay. Can you hear me?
So at this point, yes. Hmm. Yeah, the technical bugs are definitely having having their way and implementing some sort of strategic boycott apparently to providing a fluid connection. Is an alternative is using your is it using your mobile device an alternative to give that a
Yeah,
go
it
maybe?
might be.
Yeah, let's just give that a go. Let's see. Maybe we strike some better luck with that. Let's see. Vamos a ver. Let me send the link. Okay. Okay. Let's see. Let's give it a see if you can try with this phone. All right. So those of you who are joining in right now, trying to see if we can resolve the bit of a technical issue with on Anthony Venn-Brown's side. Let's see if we can get his mobile device working now and he can plug in. So those who are coming in, we have Anthony Venn-Brown joining us from Australia and writer of A Life of Unlearning, third edition and first edition, uh, basically a autobiographical book of basically his ins and outs of I'll say that his experiences in the church, and but hopefully he'll be able to log in so he can tell us more about his experience. All right, let's see. Let's see. Okay, Anthony, I see you. Let's see if we can bring you on. Vamos a ver. Okay,
I wonder if this is better.
it is. Do you have a way of horizontalizing it?
Yeah, I have hands, and I can pick up my phone and do
No,
that.
I'm just. Is your phone capable of doing that?
I'm very technical. What's this? What's what I do? It's very clever.
Let's see. Let's see if you can turn our world upside down. Good.
There we are.
Yeah.
Oops. There we go. I can take this out now.
Okay. So
That might be better, eh?
hasta ahora, don't jinx it. Don't jinx it, Anthony.
Hello,
so
everybody.
so in summary, we have Anthony Venn-Brown intro again, joining us from Australia. So times of pandemia, the bit of a recount of the question I asked you before. What things were you doing? How has it affected you? And what things have you noticed that it's brought up in society?
Right, right. So, yes, to recap, is that I was living in Sydney when the lockdown began in March, and I have a friend who lives down in the national park who had bought a block of land and is intended to bulldoze the little cottage on here to build a whole new house. And he said, well, why don't you come down here for that time? So I am in an amazing place and I'm looking out at the water and the trees all around and the birds and it's incredibly isolated and peaceful. So talk about blessed, you know, little one bedroom holiday fishing cottage. And I'm living here and most of the time my Wi-Fi is working reasonably well. I must remember this to use the phone in future and not to use the Wi-Fi. So thanks for that. So I see what others are going through and the struggles and what isolation is doing for them and their mental health and everything. But I am in an incredibly good place geographically, emotionally, and psychologically. My observation is that, as with any crisis, it seems to bring out the best and the worst in humanity. And we see people doing some incredibly creative and generous and caring and compassionate things. And you see this other bloody stupid stuff going on about masks and people doing that politically and yeah, and people putting other lives at risk. It's just that's the really sad thing is when you see this whole thing, a global health crisis we're going through, and people start talking about their personal freedoms.
Yeah, and I think that reflects us to the failure of individualism, and what that is that what that the mythological value I think of individualism as though it adds worthy substances to humanity. And I think that's a bit of a failure that we can say maybe as to maybe that tied up with capitalism, with maybe the the toxicity or the extreme manifestations of it. The entitlement. We see that plentifully here in the United States. I mean, I think to exemplify an iconize or an iconic demonstration of individualism, you see it very, very tangible here in the United States. Another thing I like to do here is for people to get to know a little bit about my guests and explore a little bit in their lives is through this question where I ask people to share three experiences in their life that they feel were moments of catharsis, like cathartic experiences. They could be moments, instances, processes, seasons, but three of those in your life that you could share that you feel are very key moments in forming the person that you are today.
Three.
I know it's like 27 or 27,000.
Oh, three. Oh, I wish you would have prepared me for this. But that's better to be more spontaneous, isn't it? Yes. Okay, so three experiences which have been um, cathartic, transformative, crucial moments in my life that a realization happened, a decision was made, something along those lines. I think that probably one that I would talk about first of all was maybe let's go back a little bit. You know that I used to be a high-profile Pentecostal preacher in Australia, preaching all the mega churches, and had gone through everything to try and change my sexual orientation. Had invested 22 years of prayer, exorcisms, conversion therapy programs, everything to change my sexual orientation. At the age of 40, I fell in love with a guy. That is not supposed to happen. And I realized that it wasn't about the sex, it was about the love. And the outcome of that was that I did a public confession in front of the church of 800 people and resigned from the ministry. And you know, I had lost everything. My whole intention was that I would spend the rest of my life serving God and preaching. So when I did that, what I discovered was that essentially all the friends that I had as preachers and the denomination that I had served for many, many years essentially had abandoned me and said there was no hope for me. And I remember getting that letter from the National Executive of the Assemblies of God. And I was in the kitchen and it struck me, okay, I'm on my own. And there was a moment there of that could have been of complete resentment and anger, but something happened, and I remembered looking back at other people's lives that had been through similar things. Maybe not homosexuality, but maybe they had fallen morally or something had happened, and so. I saw how they had become very bitter and resentful, and that had actually destroyed them. And so I made a conscious decision there and standing in the kitchen. I forgive the Assemblies of God. I forgive my friends that have abandoned me, didn't bother calling me, writing to me, contacting me, even though I had pleaded with them to support me and help me. And I forgave them all because it was really about me having the capacity to move on in my life.
Mm-hmm.
Had I not forgiven them, I would have been one of those people eaten up with bitterness and resentment, which is not good. That's one. Number two would have to be when I was in Chichen Itza in the Yucatan Peninsula at a global personal development conference. And I was in the pool. It's very, very hot. We just near the Mayan pyramid there at Chichen Itza, and in the pool. And this person's talking to me about him coming back into the Catholic faith. And while he was talking to me, it was like I went off into another space. And it was like my whole life was, you know, they say, oh, you know, my whole life played before me. When people are dying. Well, I wasn't dying. I was in the pool having a nice cool off. But it was up until that point, my life was really confusing to me. I couldn't understand anything really, and I had many questions with no answers. It was like someone had got a jigsaw puzzle and just got spread it all over the table. And you may think I'm a bit weird, but I sort of, the closest thing I can say is I heard a voice. It wasn't audible, but it was this clear. Tell your story, be completely honest. It will help lots of people. And don't worry about a publisher, I'll organize everything. I had, I never desired to be a writer, never anything, but that was clear. I came back to Sydney and I began writing my story. But that's how clear. That was a pretty defining moment, don't you think?
I would say it, it,
Uh,
it, it brought this forth.
yeah. Oh, that's right. I should have a copy here, shouldn't I?
I took care of that for you.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, and so well, as you know, Angel, that became a bestseller in Australia in 2004, which you read that and you contacted me. Went out to the third edition, which you're currently reading, and made you cry this evening.
Very much, very much.
So we're up to number 3. As you will be aware, reading the book, that there was a young man who came into my life called James, and James and I fell head over heels in love. And I remember lying in bed after we'd been making love, and we both burst into tears and began to cry. The level of happiness and peace and fulfillment, and it was like God was looking down on us and saying, "Go for it, boys." And you know what? I think it was in that moment I realized that what I had been seeking all my life was not sex with another man, but intimacy. Of course, that is the most profound, intimate experience, spiritually, physically, emotionally, that I have ever had. And that used to happen regularly after we made love. And so the shift in me was incredible, because I finally realized this is what it's all about. There's nothing evil. This is not an abomination. This is not unnatural. This is the most beautiful experience that 2 human beings can have together. And, as I shared that with some friends, heterosexual friends, some of them shared with me that they'd had a similar experience. I didn't realize people cried after sex. Thought they had a cigarette.
They can do both.
Apparently, and you read about my previous sexual encounters, which they would last seconds and would never be any moment of tenderness, affection. I wouldn't even speak to the person. I wouldn't even give them my name, And here is what I had missed out on for decades of my life. So thank God that I had that. That's the reason, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. And you first mentioned, and it calls out to me personally, um, having friendships tested. When you speak about, for example, your colleagues at church, your colleagues in that pilgrimage where you were in the evangelical or the Pentecostal world, in pretty high positions, in positions of legitimate following. But there's something interesting that happens when things don't go according to plan and shit hits the fan. And I think that's a very opportune moment to test the waters in relationships, not to maybe use it as a recommended universal formula for everyone to go through, because it's heavy, but things are tested and relationships are tested. And I want to ask you a little bit, deepening a little bit more specifically on that, because at that point, and that's basically, I'm understanding that's how you start your book, basically in that moment where you're about to speak in that conference. I don't know if that's what you're referencing, when you had to speak out. So in that moment, you were at the peak, let's say at the climatic peak of your ministry, at the climatic peak of this organization of You the Life and everything you had built with so much endeavor and effort. What is it like to not only lose friendships but lose like legitimacy and also, I don't want to elaborate too much of the question because I'm sure you'll expand much on it. But to lose friendships or to lose alleged friendships, I guess that's what it really tests, friendships. So to lose alleged friendships, and also like legitimacy, and I want to touch into how you were personally feeling, if you felt like you really had failed God in those moments.
Yeah. Um, it was completely devastating, that experience. It would be one of the most traumatic experiences of my life, devastating. And I remember, I came home from that experience. Some of my friends at that point in the local church had gathered around me, and all I could do was keep disappearing and crying. And I remember that crying went on daily for 3 weeks. That's not an exaggeration. And at night, I would cry myself to sleep. And then when I woke up in the morning, I'd begin crying again, and have to find the courage to actually get out of bed and put my feet on the floor and face the challenges of that day. Because there was the humiliation. So that was an incredibly traumatic event. And sometimes when I'm doing work, with churches or denominations or Christian organizations, sometimes I read an extract from that first chapter, called The Confession. And, that was in 1991. And I can very rarely get through that without choking up at some point, because of the trauma of that. I lost my purpose for life. I wanted to serve God. I had humiliated my children. I had dishonored my marriage. I had betrayed my wife. The miracle is that I lived through that, Angel, and I don't probably, well, no, I won't worry about giving away too much, but the night before, I stood at a cliff edge considering finishing it, knowing what I had to face the next day. So there's a bit of a miracle that I actually survived that. And here I am today, being able to talk about that. And yeah, but it was incredibly devastating. It's difficult to put into words, but that explanation about how that impacted me emotionally, and still does today, probably demonstrates how deep that was.
And there's an element of you're a Pentecostal preacher, so there's some theological perceptions you have of what it is to live a certain Christian life or not. Back then, I'm sure there's been a lot of deconstruction from then to now, but living in that moment, do you feel that everything that the way it was handled in the moment, I'm not talking about later on, do you think the way it was handled appropriately?
No, it wasn't handled appropriately. I was told by the denominational leadership that doing this public confession would be a demonstration of how genuine I was about repenting of my sin and my adultery. So I believe that since that happened, that it is not encouraged anymore to do a public confession if someone's fallen morally. But I can tell you from all the emails I've had from readers of my autobiography that it's not an uncommon experience. Girls that have fallen pregnant out of marriage have been shamed publicly, the same thing. Others that have fallen morally, some people that, they had an affair. That has also been the experience, which when they read my book, it's almost re traumatizing for them because
Yeah.
it takes them back to that terrible, terrible experience of shaming. That's what it is. It's the ultimate shaming to make you stand up in front of hundreds of people and to confess your something that you already feel incredible shame about. It amplifies it beyond comprehension.
Did any part inside of you problematize that process? Like within you, did at any point did you think this is bullshit? Like they don't want to restore me. Like this is. I think they just want to make an example of me. Did that ever, even as you failed and you, did that ever also cross your mind?
Not at that point at all, Angel, because you can probably appreciate it. At that point, I was in a state of trauma and shock.
Mm-hmm.
And also, I had said goodbye to the man that I'd fallen in love with. And I had got to the point where I believed that I had actually been deceived by the devil. So I deserved all this. That's what I believed at that point. I deserved the humiliation. I deserved the shaming. I deserved the embarrassment.
Yeah.
What I did think about was my wife and my children don't deserve this.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I see that, and that's why I ask, within the specificity of the moment, because there's so much going on, and there's so much that you're also bringing on to your wife and to your girls, so that's all happening. Even if it's just you by yourself, there's so much happening in that equation. But then you have your wife, you have your kids. So I want to get a little bit of a feel of without fetishizing the moment. I don't want to like romanticize that and not be sensible to that. And as I read in your book, I feel there is the real, authentic, and genuine desire to please God. Like you're really wanting to do things right. Like you go through Bible college, you submit yourself through exorcisms, you're drafted into the military, and then you have to go through that, and also you have to. I just the exorcisms. I'm like, holy shit! And then on top of that, then reparative therapy, which is like, I was reminded of the movie Boy Erased, as you, I don't know if you've seen it, but as you narrated some of those things, I'm like, and you mention, just I think you're a living, walking miracle. Just every single one of those things have driven people over the edge. Have driven people over the edge. So that's not a question. I'm just kind of like, it's too much. It's
Yeah.
too much.
I've often said, Angel, that you know, if there is a God, I've had several miracles.
Yeah.
Well, one is I'm still alive.
Yeah.
Yeah. Number two is I have no bitterness or resentment. Um, Number three is that I still have a faith of sorts. And number four, which I used to say, but I have to correct now. I used to say, interestingly, I used to say, and I have no major mental health issues that I'm aware of. And the reason I said that I had those four miracles is that my inbox was flooded with emails from readers of A Life of Unlearning saying, your story is my story. Then they would pour out their hearts to me about what they had experienced. That then would, I would see that there had been suicide attempts. I would see that some people were incredibly bitter and resentful and angry. And then, there were others that had completely rejected their faith and were almost like evangelistic atheists. And then I also saw that people were suffering from major mental health issues. What I've come to realize is actually, I do have PTSD, and it isn't just from that experience. It goes right back to teenage years and a whole range of things. Yeah. So I've learned that the trauma never leaves you. You just learn to manage it.
Yeah, it speaks us to our resiliency a bit.
Yeah. So you just learn to manage it and you're conscious of it. And I think the reason I used to say that I had no mental health issues that I'm aware of was that moment of resolution of the Christian belief system and the perceived conflict with my sexual orientation was so profound. And so, the sense of peace that I experienced, it was almost like a conversion experience, that had that same dynamic. I used to say to some people, I felt like I got born again, because it was so profound. It was so life changing that it was easy to say, oh yeah, I'm free. But then later on, I go, oh, maybe there's a bit of that stuff around. And maybe I'll have to learn to live with that as opposed to, because I had that belief system, oh, well, things get healed,
Yeah.
But in life, not everything gets healed, and we have to learn to live with some things. And I manage that consistently.
You mentioned this. You mentioned this phenomenon of being born again, and I wrote a little bit about this when I announced today's talk about coming out stories and the liberation and how liberating coming out stories could be, but also how traumatic they can be when they're not timely, when they're not consented. And I think about that moment in that conference or in that big assembly that you had to kind of have a coming out moment, or at least I'll elaborate it as though it was kind of like a coming out moment, even though it wasn't very clear. People didn't know what your sin was, but Jesus, people talk and people suggest, so I'm sure people were developing their own little myths and their own little narratives. But if we were to consider that as a sort of a coming out moment, did you have a proper coming out moment? Like, and I used as a bit of a catapult when you said born again, did you have like a proper, like in terms of I know you had it with your parents, but in terms of on a more public sphere that was not like that one?
Yes, and it would be important to note, because there'll be a range of people who are listening to this today, is that that coming out, when I walked away from everything 12 months after that event, realizing that nothing was going to change, that was supposedly my coming out. But it was not proud. It was not about pride. It was not about feeling empowered. It was a reluctant acceptance. Ah, you know, oh well, I guess I may as well accept this and just, I'll live as a gay man for the next 10 years, and then have a good time, and then I'll kill myself.
Hmm.
That's a rather
Hmm.
tragic way of coming out.
Yeah.
But that level of reluctant acceptance is not something that is unusual. And then later on, when I looked at my previous belief system and actually dug down to what was the source of all that, that was my freeing moment. I remember being at a dance party, about 40,000 people. And I was up on the stage with the go-go boys, in my little dancing shorts with my glow sticks. And this was one of the first things that I had been to. And this was many years after actually, coming out. And I had this moment where I just suddenly realized that I was standing in the very same spot that a few years before I had preached
Wow.
to 5,000 young people. It was in the same auditorium. And at that point, when I looked down at, what was going on, I knew what was going on in the crowd and everything, and I went, oh, fuck. And I just took steps backwards. I pretty much thought I was crazy because I actually walked backwards from the edge of the stage when I realized these two amazing contrasts.
Hmm.
And if I explored that at that point, I felt like my brain would just be banging on one side of the wall and banging on the other, and I would lose my mind. But I went down and joined my friends and danced, and I remember there was a moment where I fell in love with my tribe. And obviously, God, I love my tribe. I love the diversity. I love the outrageousness. I love the humor. I love the color. I love all these things which I often looked at with the LGBT community. I have fallen in love with my community. I know it has its imperfections. I know that there'd be some things I'd like to change, but I really do love my tribe.
But that's all. That's with all humanity. That's not. It's not an. It's not an. It's not an. You got the LGBT community doesn't hold rights to that. That's humanity. That's humanity in its entirety. And I. But I feel you when you say, like, when you feel that embrace. I mean, that must be so powerful. Like a very cathartic moment. And in that juxtaposition, or in that moment where you're seeing, I mean, and in life sometimes we have those moments, and they can be so poetic, and they can be so eye opening, kind of like the scales falling of our eyes, or just a moment of like, whoa, too much to take in right now. But nonetheless, it's man, like, for that moment to not happen at all, let it happen, let it come in, and I'll chew it, even if it feels like I bit a bit more than I can chew, because as humans, I think we need these moments of deep reflection. When if you can, if you can, like, just like you remember that moment when you were, like, gaining lives, or hoarding lives for Jesus, or saving souls, or however we want to verbalize that. But living of this mission to preach the good news. In that pilgrimage, did you have gay people of the LGBT community come to you, and where you were maybe confronted, or maybe you felt like you handled it differently than the Pentecostal manual tells you to handle these kinds of, this scenario, where maybe your own story allowed you to have a little bit more empathy for them, or did you not have any of these moments at all?
I'd like to say yes, but the truth is that there would be times when maybe a young guy would confess to me that he had homosexual desires or feelings or something or other like that. And I would, in that, because that was incredibly confronting, because I was not winning. I was doing all the things that I was supposed to do, quoting Bible verses, praying, resisting temptation. I was doing all those things, but not succeeding. And so my offer to them in those moments was just essentially the formulas.
What you have been told.
What I had been told and what I was trying to practice unsuccessfully, because I thought that it was the problem, Angel, was with me. The problem was not with the formula. The problem was not with God. The Bible says homosexuality is a sin. Actually, it doesn't say that, but that's what you believe. So,
Yeah.
you if there is a problem, and this used to get very confusing for me because I'm trying to figure out, is this the devil that's tempting me? Is this my own flesh and my just being selfish? So where which is going on for me here is quite confusing, because if it's the devil, I just have to claim the power of Jesus and resist this. And if it's my own flesh, well, then I need to become a holy, righteous person and put the flesh to death.
Yeah,
So
subdue it.
these are different strategies, neither of which work, because when you're same-sex oriented, when you're bisexual or you're transgender, you are what you are. And, heterosexuality is not evil. I find it funny when I read all these stories that people, they say, oh, I was gay, I used to do lots of drugs and I used to have lots of sex and I used to do this and, my heart was broken. And, the stories are always the same.
Mm-hmm.
And then Jesus saved me, and then I walked away from my homosexuality. Well, that's what they say.
Mm-hmm.
Heterosexuals have exactly the same experience. They can have meaningless encounters. They can totally make wrong decisions and choices and totally screw up their life and do drugs, do all exactly the same. It's not a gay lifestyle. It's a subculture. And then when they experience Jesus, they don't say, "Oh,
Okay, let's see here. We got some technical problem. Let's see if we can get Anthony back again.
okay."
So, question is, when you were preaching as Youth Alive and everything, did you ever encounter gay affirming churches, gay affirming preachers that you might have come in contact with?
Well, in our Pentecostal belief system, you can hear me okay? In our Pentecostal belief system, there was this infallibility of the Bible. Well, but that's really about the infallibility of your interpretation of the Bible. So there, I didn't come across any gay affirming churches, or there wasn't really. I wasn't aware really that people would say they were gay Christians. In my world, you were either heterosexual and Christian or homosexual and going to go to hell. So there was no in between. So I would, and this is something interesting that I think maybe some of your listeners will be interested in. that, if you come from a background like ours, in a Pentecostal evangelical, strongly Bible believing culture, that if you have to work out if the whole thing about the 6 verses or passages about homosexuality, you go through this process. You start reading and realizing that Sodom and Gomorrah has got nothing to do with homosexuality. You realize that there's incorrect translation of 1 Corinthians 6 verse 9. You realize that Romans 1 has nothing to do with homosexuality. It's all about pagan rituals. And so, but then the first port of call is maybe I'm being deceived.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I say to people, keep reading. And then they read some more and educate themselves, inform themselves. And then the next thing that comes up is, well, maybe I'm just trying to justify myself. And I say, keep reading. and then they keep reading, and then they realize, oh, actually, this is not as black and white an issue as I used to think it is. And I say, well, keep reading. And then they get to the point and go, actually, you know what? There's a whole lot of theologians who understand this, whether they're LGBT or whether they're straight. Whoever they are, very educated people who are all saying the same thing. We've been incredibly wrong about homosexuality. So had I had any contact with any of those people, I would, of course, would have said, well, you've been deceived. And it's clear. I love that statement. The Bible clearly says, and I say, listen here. The Bible is clear about a lot of things, about loving your neighbor. One thing, the Bible is very clear about murder. The Bible is very clear about kindness. The Bible is very clear about lots of things. One thing it's not clear about is homosexuality. And the Bible definitely, there's no verse you can read, go, homosexuality is a sin. You have to look at a verse where there is same-sex activity and then come up with an interpretation that this is a sin. But the Bible never says that.
In my pilgrimage, as I have been, kind of like defeathering some of these, constructions of faith and whatnot. I mean, as a non-Christian now, but even as I was still pilgrimaging in the Christian world, I was not. I got to a point where I was like, I can be a Christian even if I do affirm that I do think that these people were probably condemning homosexuality. I'm like, okay, that's them. That's them. Even if it were to be that, even if that were to be the case, even if it were to be Paul, whomever was talking about it, that's their experience. And great, thank you. I can read it. I can see it in that context. I'll try to understand the historical perspective of it. I don't need to bring it here and try to make a triangle fit into a circle and make sense it as though my life depended on it. So I've pronounced that. I know that it's not a comfortable thing to pronounce in some circles, but I mean that's where I was at even as a Christian, because I wasn't holding the Bible as this sort of like idolatry thing to idolize. I just saw it as people's experiences. I have my experiences; they have their experiences. But I wanted to ask you, Anthony. You had your moments of spiritual awakening or spiritual formation in Christianity. I want to hear a little bit more about like post that 1991 moment. And how have you reconstructed your faith? How have you deconstructed your faith? How have you unlearned? And as comfortable as you feel sharing that voyage, also your daughters, your former wife, like how has that also been a part of that deconstruction to where you're at to where you are now. I know that's so much to run, but let's say in the last 24 minutes we have, that's like, I don't know, maybe you can run a minute per year or, or 2 years per minute.
Yeah, well, the spiritual journey, this is something that, once again, I think might be helpful for some of your listeners today. Is that, the sexuality journey and the faith journey are actually two very separate things. Even though they are inextricably intertwined for us as LGBT people, they are actually two separate journeys. So you get people who have maybe resolved their sexuality issue, and yet their faith is a closet of unresolved issues, which can be just as damaging as an unresolved issue around your sexuality or your gender identity. So that they have to be tackled sometimes tackled at different times. And so I found that resolution of myself personally, and then I thought, I didn't really care what the Bible said. I just knew that I was okay. And I remember after I had one of those life-changing experiences, it was a purpose of life experience, and I realized that I prayed for the first time in about 8 years, and I said, I don't understand this, God, but you and I are on speaking terms again. Like, even when I was in a crucial, life-threatening situation, previously I had refused to pray. Okay, you're not going to win this way, God. So I just refused to pray, whereas normally I would pray in a crisis like that. But yeah, I got back on speaking terms with God. That was when I started having my born again experience. I was like, oh my God, like all these things that are happening in my life. Like, how is this happening? Like, somebody's got control again, in a good way.
And this is around what time?
This was around the late 90s.
Okay.
So this was about 7 years after I'd left the church. So what I've discovered, of course, I observed this in many people that I've worked with over the last 20 years, is that we try and fit our Christian experience and into some theology and into some life experience, and we try to get it all nice, neatly packaged.
One package deal, yeah.
Yeah, but it's impossible. You think you can do it, but you can't. And so what I observed and what I experienced was that I that was a good place to get to initially, because that was my biggest area of conflict. But moving on, I guess that I've come to realize some very fundamental things that are not just in Christianity. They're in every major religion, but they're not even in religion.
It's a societal thing.
Their values, and I realized that was really what I was connecting with a lot within my Christian experience. The conflict I had with integrity all those years, that was my greatest cognitive dissonance, that I could be two people. So to find integrity now, to be true to myself and true to others, that experience of harmony is beautiful. But then there's the other, that kindness that I mentioned, and unconditional love and non-judgment. My God, all these incredible values that if every human being lived by them, this world would be a better place. So I would say that I'm very universal in my belief system today, and it is values based, not belief based. And I might add, I did realize that I thought, who the fuck do I think I am saying I know God? I
Yep.
am a speck on this planet, which is a speck in the universe, which and I say I know God. I may think I do, but yeah, hey, come on, let's be a little bit realistic here. And so I was very happy to live in the mystery.
Mm.
And I would much rather have questions that can't be answered than answers that can't be questioned.
You know, I hear you. You say that, and that resonates so much within me. You know, and to give you a little example, and to kind of like intersect our roads a little bit. You know, when I was in Sydney and I was doing Bible college, it for me got to a point where I obviously didn't go there to deconstruct my faith. I went there because I wanted to be in that place, Hillsong and all that stuff, and I mean also just the fact that I could be in the other side of the world. I mean it was a many layered opportunities, but it got to a point for me where it was not sustainable for me. It was not sustainable to follow the motions. It was not sustainable. I mean, it got to a point for me that I I could predict the whole show. I could predict everything that was going to happen. I could predict when Brian was going to get up. I could predict what he was going to say before the offerings. I could predict. And to me, I remember I got really excited when I saw a handicapped person once because I thought, oh wow, there's a person that's not perfect here. And it sounds horrible, but I really felt like, wow, I can relate because I felt I was getting so much triumphalistic talk that I'm like, this is too, it's like having too much sugar. You can enjoy it at first, but then for after a while, it just feels like, no, I gotta, this has to exit my body. It's too much. So when I started getting to that point where I was kind of seeing that too, like the whole God management system wasn't working for me, was when I started letting go. And I felt as I started letting go of God, letting go of this God management system, letting go of Christianity, I felt like I was getting closer to the teachings of Jesus. I felt, and I jokingly say, I quote Shane Claiborne who says, I abandoned Christianity to best follow Jesus. Because there's so much wiring and rewiring, and it just makes everything so complicated. So when you say that statement you made about like the notion that I know God, yeah, I had that too. It seems so incongruent and it didn't make any sense. I'm like, how entitled is that? How entitled does one have to say that? And I want to ask you, because I know there was some time that even maybe when I was in Australia in 2005, 2006. Were you visiting Hillsong at that time? And during that time, I remember. I know. I heard that. I remember hearing when I found out about you. Oh yeah, sometimes he goes to City Church. Um. So what was that for you? Like what was talking like 2005, like around that era? What were you doing there? What was going on in your life at that point?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I think you're the first person that's ever asked me that. Of course, it's there in a life of unlearning. But so essentially, what I was doing there was I was trying to find a connection with my Christian past and my newly found, no, not newly found, my evolution of faith. People often will say things, and this would be good to mention this here. People say that so and so's losing their faith. They might not be losing it; it might be evolving past a Sunday school black and white, um, belief system. So I was trying to see how that would fit. Another thing was that it was a demonstration that I was not bitter and resentful. And also it was a demonstration of, well, if all the gay people which have found resolution leave the church, how's anyone we're going to see? What is it like to find a fulfilled, happy gay Christian? And so I got involved in, Sunday services, went to a connect group, and and I was, and they, it was interesting that most people expected me to come in there as a gay activist and start arguing, but I
They're
didn't.
waiting for that.
Yeah, they weren't waiting for that. But that wasn't why I was there. I was there just to enjoy the fellowship, to enjoy the worship, to enjoy, I'm here for the same reasons you are. And that had a profound impact upon even Brian Houston, because the expectation was I'd come to cause trouble, which that was not my intention at all.
Did you ever have chances to sit and talk to him?
Oh yes, we've had numerous conversations over the years, not of recent times, but initially we had a number of conversations.
During that time, like when you were assisting, for example, the city campus.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Did
yeah.
you?
That really, it was the way that I was. So it's about, here I am. Look, I love God like you do.
No shame.
Yeah, so you got a problem with my homosexuality? Oh, really? I'd be quite shocked when people go, "What problem? What's the problem?" and it was just that act of me being myself, I think, which then opened up the door for conversations. And actually, I write about that. There's an article on my blog. You go to www.abbi.org.au, and if you search in the box Hillsong, you'll find a number of articles. But I've recently written about a 5,000-word article which was entitled "How, When, and Why Hillsong Banned Ex-Gay or Conversion Therapy Referrals."
Mm-hmm.
And you can read there about some of the conversations that we had and the interactions that we had and the outcome
Yeah.
of that. But it's a long article, but I thought it's about time I put that out there.
Is as we bring this interaction to a landing, and for these last 10 minutes, am I interpreting you right? Because I relate. I mean, you say things I relate so much. In seeing, like, for example, you're using your very presence as an act of demonstration, as a problematizing. And when I say problematizing, I mean you're in direct eye contact with the status quo, and you see you're not happy with the status quo, and you use your very presence as a demonstration. So I hear you when you say I'm not here to kind of like pick it or anything, but your very presence there suffices in that visibilization. Is that, was there that thought, like I'm here, and this in and of itself is an act like that I'm making. Also, I don't need to hide anywhere either.
Yeah. Exactly what you said. I knew that I was an enigma. I should have been angry. I should have been militant. I should have been aggressive. I should have told them where to stick it. I should have caused trouble. I should have been challenging them. I should have been condemning them, but I wasn't.
Yeah.
I was just me, and I'm lovely.
Yeah, you're freaking cool, man. I wish I would have. I wish I would have known you when I was there.
We would have had some interesting conversations.
Yes,
And
yes.
speaking of conversations, there were times when I could have those conversations, but it wasn't that I forced it; they came naturally.
Yeah.
And I know that people shifted in their understanding. because of a
No.
conversation that was not, I didn't have a big agenda. That's another thing. Another thing that I learned that people might find helpful was that an Assemblies of God lecturer from the college contacted me because he read my book, and he wanted to meet up, and I was going to have coffee with him, and all these things are going through my mind, like, oh dear, is this going to be like a debate, an argument, and there's that voice thing again, and something inside me said, don't have an agenda,
No. Just go.
just go and be yourself and build the relationship. That proved to be the most incredible thing. I developed an amazing friendship, and that man did an amazing job in influencing many, many students in a new understanding about LGBT issues. So, in that
So necessary.
Hillsong conference context, it wasn't about causing trouble or I'm here with an agenda. I'm here to be me.
Yeah.
And
And there's always a realm of possibility that that's how they're going to interpret it, because it's such a conflict-less environment. It's so overtly sanitized that your very presence could be perceived as threatening, and that speaks way more as to that environment than as to you, because it's almost like they've already put this whole narrative over you, and it's almost inescapable, and you haven't done anything. And of course, with you being there and just staying there, it'll speak out. But I think that in these overly sanitized environments, where, I mean, that's one of the things I start noticing in Hillsong and in many churches. There's so much preaching and so few conversations. So much preaching and such few conversations. One way, one way, one way. And that's something that really red flagged me. I'm like, I wish there was more dialogue.
right.
And not
But
like, I think this way, I think that way.
I think what you're saying there, Angel, is not so much about more conversation, because you have that in the Connect group, don't you? You have that
Ideally.
in your common interest group. The challenge is not so much the conversation. The challenge is, I have some questions.
Can I ask them?
I have some doubts. And is this a safe place to explore
Bingo.
that, to come to a new understanding? I need a space where I can work some of these things out. And I may come back to the traditional view, or I may explore other possibilities. But in many of those environments, it's not just Hillsong, it's right across Pentecostalism and evangelicalism, and in traditional churches, Catholicism as well, Mormon faith, you can't question.
Yeah. Yeah.
You
Because
can't
it's a
question.
dangerous territory.
Yeah.
I like to finish off these talks talking about utopias, and in utopia as a reference point in the horizon. There's this quote that says, I take 5 steps walking towards the utopia as a reference point of that, as that reference point of the idyllic, of that which I long for. And I take 5 steps, and then the utopia takes 5 more steps, and I take 10 steps, and it takes 10 more steps. So then what is the point? I'm never gonna attain it. Well, the point is that you keep on moving forward. You keep on pressing forward. So much of society has defined us in a trophy-driven society, in a society that forfeits processes and exalts crossing finish lines. And I think it's time to start breaking this myth of renouncing the process, which is the beautiful, ugly, messy, joyful thing that I think we need to embrace. So my question to you, Anthony, what are those utopias that keep you pressing forward, that keep you moving forward, a source of inspirations, a source of indignation, whatnot. Let me give you here. Give me a second because I got you on mute, and if you're on mute, you're not going to be able to. We're not going to be able to hear you. This is the very last question. I want to get this one right. Let me refresh here. One sec. Okay, let's see. You there?
Yes, I'm
Okay.
here.
So, what are those utopias that keep you moving forward in life, even with
Mm,
society in the world as it might be that seems quite shitty at times?
we've got to have hope. We've got to have hope for a better future. We've got to have hope that countries, like what you're experiencing currently in America, is that the polarization is somehow diffused and people see what they have more in common than what is different, and that there be more compassion. So, having those things, if we lose hope for a changed humanity, it, it's we're never going to get anywhere, are we?
I think it's worthy mentioning, quoting good old Harvey Milk, got to give him hope.
Got to give them hope. Can I share with you a little story?
Sure, you can.
So, some of your listeners will know of Exodus, which was, the umbrella organization of all the ex-gay, ex-LGBT organizations. And so what I did was, every time Alan Chambers, who was the president, he did something that was positive, I'd send him an email and say, Alan, thank you so much. That was really good. I really appreciate it. I know we're on different sides of the fence, but I want to let you know that I thought that was really good, and that's appreciated. Because I knew that for that one email saying thank you, he would probably have another 1,000 saying you're a prick.
Yeah.
And calling everything else under the sun, maybe not even that polite. Anyway, so that evolved into really quite a warm dialogue, to the point where we were joking with each other. And Alan has a great sense of humour. And so it got to the point where I said, Alan, how would you feel about me coming to an Exodus conference? And he said, I'd love you to come. And so I went to the 2013 Exodus conference, one of two gay people invited into that space, to hear Alan Chambers say, we're closing down. It's over. And I was sitting there in the congregation hearing that. And I went, oh my God. I knew there could possibly be other cards. I just didn't expect it to be at that conference in Los Angeles in 2013 in June.
Wow.
Those 3 days, 4 days were horrendously traumatic for him, as every media outlet wanted to have, an interview all around it just didn't stop.
I remember him.
Popping in and out, But he promised me an interview. And so just before the final meeting, we got 10, 15 minutes together. And I said to him, Alan, people will find it quite intriguing as to what am I doing here? This person who's been at the forefront of closing down organizations that Exodus has promoted in Australia, people will be intrigued. And he said to me, "You were kind to me."
Hmm.
And I thought, oh my God, is that all it takes? Simple kindness to others can change everything.
Man, thank you for sharing that story. Thank you. And thank you for sharing here. Thank you. Thank you for being a friend. I value you, your story, your sense of humor, just the fact that you attempt to be, just be. I
Just
think
be.
that I think that's way much more profound than we sometimes allow it to be. So a big hug from this side of the world to yours. And I hope we can I hope one day we can definitely sit down and have this conversation and more in person. Long
We
for that
could do
day.
that over a Chardonnay.
Claro que sí. Oh man. Yeah. Bring it on.
And I just want to say one thing before I leave. Of course, thanks for this opportunity, Angel. And you've asked some great questions and got some stuff out of me that others haven't. But I would also like to apologize to the people who were offended by my swearing. But sometimes there is a word which demonstrates exactly how intensely I feel about something or other.
And it's
And
perfect.
an occasional fuck, you won't go to hell for it.
And there's no other word in the vocabulary for that precise expression. And this is people come in this space and like, can I say that cuss word? Can I say that colorful word? I'm like, what's a cuss word? What's a colorful word? I don't understand what you mean. It's just express yourself, express yourself as you wish. Thank you. I've really enjoyed this dialogue. To all those who partook, who watched, who came in, who left, who are going to watch as it is recorded. Thank you. And I'd like to close with these words from a Puerto Rican astrologer named Walter Mercado. He was renowned all over the world, and right now there's a documentary on Netflix called Mucho Mucho Amor. And he would close his segments by saying, que tengan mucha paz, much peace, pero mucho, mucho amor. So much love to all of you. We'll see you guys around the corner. Much peace and love. Ciao. Don't disconnect, Anthony. So peace and love, people. Take care.